An important part of our mission of friendship here in the Soviet Union has been to play for you a great deal of American music. But this mission must work both ways in order to accomplish real friendship. And so we are now going to play for our American television audience the entire huge first movement of the Seventh Symphony by Shostakovich, a work written in 1941, the first year of the war, and dedicated to Shostakovich's beloved and at the time besieged city of Leningrad. Now, just before we play it for you now, I would like most humbly and respectfully to welcome to this audience Mr. Shostakovich himself, and I would like to thank him personally and in the name of my country for the wonderful music he has given us.
Shostakovich. That was Anton Karas, the theme song from The Third Man, which is my theme song, Reggie, as you know, and I don't play it that often over the last couple of months, but it's back, all right? It's back. But that was Leonard Bernstein, by the way, at the very top. 1959, he made this incredible trip to the Soviet Union. I think that was in Moscow, maybe it was St. Petersburg. In order to, like we're friends, we don't hate each other. You know what I mean? It really was gutsy. He was not Russophobic. He was one of the great artists and great minds and great composers in American history. Seriously, Leonard Bernstein, what a great humanitarian. Of course, he was haunted and hunted by the FBI, files everywhere, and the CIA. By the way, I'm Randy Credico. This is Live on the Fly. We're going to spend this first hour with a very special guest and a special co-host. The special guest is Andrei Martyanov, the historian, former naval officer in the Soviet Navy, really a brilliant guy. And Margaret Kunstler keeps telling me, when's the Russian on? She watches him religiously. Reggie, isn't that amazing? She does. All right. So he's coming on in just a minute. I'm going to bring in, we have a special co-host, and his show is Newsview. It's on every Friday at 6 p.m., okay? So, and he's got a great show, and I watch him all the time on Facebook or YouTube, and that is Garland Nixon. Garland, thank you for being my co-host.
Hey, thanks for inviting me, Randy. Really looking forward to it. I love Andrei. He's hilarious. He's really a brilliant, but he's a hilarious guy. He cracks me up.
He does.
Always has me laughing.
Have you got to read? You folks got to read his book because, and you'll adduce to this, Garland, is that these are very prophetic books. America's Final War, Disintegration, the Real Revolution in Military Affairs, and Losing Military Supremacy, which I've read and part of the other ones. And so what else do you know about Andrei? Can you just give us for those who haven't heard him?
Well, here's what I'll say, because I've known Andrei for a couple years now, and on my YouTube show and other shows, I bring him on. And, I'd listen to Andrei talk about the military, and I thought, okay, this is his perspective, whatever he has to say, I'll listen. And I know he has a significant background in naval and military engineering and all that kinds of stuff. And I just listened and thought, okay, wow, that sounds like smart stuff, but I don't really understand it. And I came to realize that he knew what the heck he was talking about when pretty much everything he predicted came true. Yeah. Pretty much everything. I can go back through my shows, one after the other, and say, holy crap, every single thing that he predicted regarding military issues would come true in the way that he said it for the reason that he said it. So I now humble myself and say, you know what? I mean, I'm not saying this guy's Nostradamus, but I ain't saying he ain't.
All right, how about the Oracle of Delphi or Cassandra? All right, we're going to play some Shostakovich and come back with Andrei the Great, Martyanov. Andrei, so great to have you back by yourself with my co-host, Garland Nixon.
My pleasure. Hi, Garland. Hi, Randy.
How are you? Just let me, before we get into the war in Iran and the special military operation, the proxy war in Ukraine, I want to just ask you, you came here in 91 or 92 during those really bad Yeltsin years. Am I correct?
We immigrated. We decided to stay in the United States after 93.
Right.
I had a business, yeah. But after 93, after seeing what Yeltsin was doing, and Russia was sliding into essentially a warm civil war. And it was the country which was run by then already by the organized crimes groups. So it wasn't a difficult decision, frankly.
Yeah. He ran the country into the ground.
Painful, but it wasn't difficult.
All right, I'm going to pass it to you, Garland. We're going to go back and forth here. Whatever you want to talk about, Garland.
Well, I think we got a couple of things going on. One of the things that I think is interesting, and I'll bring this up, you know, these two main conflicts, we talk about Ukraine and we talk about Iran separately, but I think they're part of the same conflict. I think if you look at the dynamics of these two conflicts, right, you've got two countries that it's documented in both instances that prior to the conflicts, both of these countries made an overt attempt to avoid a conflict by offering to discuss it, by offering to negotiate. In both instances, the U.S. kind of refused. And if you look at, just the number of similarities that we have here, in both instances, the adversary, if that's the right word, is saying, I do not want to talk, get some kind of a ceasefire. I do not want to stop this thing prematurely. Let's talk about root causes. In both instances, the so-called adversary wants to talk about the root cause, and the U.S. doesn't want to talk about the root cause. It's just amazing, the similarities here.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty much the same algorithm, and United States was caught essentially in its own trap. United States trapped itself, cornered itself, because obviously the people in Washington, they proceed from the grossly incorrect assumption that United States is some super pooper duper omnipotent military power, which it is not. And these people, you have to understand, you have this bunch of the lawyers, political scientists. There's no such thing as political science, just if anybody wonders, or journalists or what have you, who go into all those corridors of power, ranging from, occupying places as the congressmen or senators. And you have the same situation with the present administration or previous administration. And those people have no clue what they're talking about. Literally, they don't. Give me Tom Cotton. He won't understand the first thing about operations. He's the guy who was run through the ROTC, fraudulent military so-called education, where you get the guy with the lawyer education, you run him through whatever the routines, he takes some courses on tactics and leadership, whatever that means, and you have those people running into the modern warfare. They have no toolkit. None of them. Trump doesn't have toolkit. Pete Hegseth, he's totally illiterate in military affairs. And American military system itself of education doesn't prepare confident and competent officers for the most part. Right. Forget about and when you have this, and then suddenly you believe all those Hollywood stories, Hollywood fairy tales, and it is an echo chamber which essentially reinforces itself. And then you have these guys who say, oh yeah, we can do it. No, you can't.
Right.
Simple as that. And I've been on the record for second decade now publicly that you can't. You just don't have resources, you don't have experience, you don't have understanding of the modern warfare as it emerged in the early 2000s. There are some here and there brilliant operational ideas, but United States does not have strategists of the global repute. They still continue to go at Clausewitz or Sun Tzu, those one-liners, as if there are some wisdoms there. We live in 2026. Yeah.
Yeah, everyone quotes Clausewitz. What was he like? He was a captain or a general in the Russian army against.
He was an officer. I don't remember his rank. He was a bunch of the Germans, which have been obviously well at that time. Yeah, there was Prussians essentially, and he was actually mocked by Leo Tolstoy in War and Peace. He was mocked through the words of Prince Andrei Balkonsky, but he was in service of Russian army, and because of that, he wrote obviously Von Krieg on war, and then of course left his sort of memoirs where he essentially explained, and I quote him, that Europe cannot occupy Russia, not with the present, that kind of country cannot be occupied, period, with military forces of the whatever they had at that time in Europe, and only the internal discord can bring such country as Russia down on its knees, which was correct actually, but this applies equally to United States. But I mean, applying the Clausewitz generalizations for the modern warfare, it's like really, Russians have this proverb which is called pulling the owl over the globe, so that's pretty much what it is. Or as the other phrase and saying goes, it's the spherical horse in vacuum. So there are many good general, philosophical views on war, but you know what, as United States learned in the last months, it doesn't matter how much you know Clausewitz or how many one-liners from Sun Tzu you have, if it's not guiding you, and if you do not understand the nature of the conflict, right, which is critical, then what's the point, And United States doesn't understand, never understood the nature of the real warfare. It still operates within the paradigm, slightly, patched up here with the new technologies of the World War II, and primarily this expeditionary type of view on the warfare. It doesn't work with such countries as Iran, let alone Russia. And you saw yourself what happened since 2022.
All right. Before
if I may, Randy.
Yes, go ahead.
Let me add something here. And so we've got Andrei, who is a man who is, highly educated in this particular field. I've been traveling for the last several weeks. I was out of the country, and I'm back, and I'm going to do my show on Pacifica, WPFW today at 6. But one of the things that I have to say, one of the last things that I said before I left, and this was just before the war was about to start, and I said, look, if we attack Iran, two things. Number one, that's it for the U.S. empire. It's game over. I said, and number two, we're going to lose this war. So one of the points that I'm going to make coming back today is this. It's one thing if Andrei, a man who, has the education in this field, looks at that and says, okay, based on my, educated judgment and the educated guess, I think that the U.S. is going to lose. It's another thing if Garland Nixon, who effectively is Schmucky the Clown when it comes to military issues, looks at it and says, yeah, we're going to lose. I could figure it out. The uneducated guy who knows nothing about military looked at that and said, yeah, we're going to lose. Explain to me how a guy like me who has no knowledge or education of the military were like, yeah, we're going to lose, and boy, we're going to lose in a hurry, and bad, man, we're going to lose bad. Explain to me how all of these military geniuses from West Point can't figure it out.
And one of them, I want to play this before you respond to that, Andrei. I want to play this. This is one of those generals he's talking about, and one of your favorites with initials J.K. Figure it out.
Oh, geez.
All right, here we go.
What they want here is to drag this out as long as possible beyond the 2 weeks and get extensions, because they know full well as oil prices come down, as the stock market goes up, as the economic pressure on the president is removed, as well as political pressure on the president, the Iranians are likely to believe that the president will be less inclined to restart the war, even if the deal breaks apart. And that's what they are counting on here. So the president, I know for a fact he understands this because I spoke to him about it. And the reality is that I believe he will hold the Iranians to this deadline and time.
All right, Andrei, you can respond to that and add on to what Garland just said.
Oh, who was that?
Jack
Kellogg
Kane.
or
Jack
Keane?
Kane.
Keane, oh good
You
lord!
never see them
He
together in
has
the
to
same-
go back to grammar school and learn something about that. This, listen, I mean, okay, let's put it this way: this parade of the nincompoops with their 3-4 stars on the Fox News or what have you, they will be laughed out of the morning briefing of the brigade level staff in Russian army. These are clowns who do not understand what they are dealing with. They are stuck in their whatever the complex of inferiority all of them have, because obviously these are losers of the Vietnam War, and obviously the people with really not serious understanding of what they are dealing with. They do not know civilizations. They don't have understanding of the military history. American military history, especially World War II, was written by such people as, Erich von Manstein, Hauser, and other German, Wehrmacht and SS generals who have been officially employed as the employees of the U.S. Army Department of History. So you can imagine what kind of history they wrote for them. And so when you look at that, it's like Iran are not stupid. For some reason, they think that everybody is stupid. Iranians can count resources. They understand essentially what American doctrine is, and I can tell you what American doctrine in terms of warfare is. Launch everything you got. Standoff weapons, long range fires. See what sticks. Then in about 20 to 30 days or in the operation, start the destabilization operations by the CIA and what have you, other special forces, try to regime change, and after that, start in earnest the ground operation, and then you have the 3 echelons, the echelon of the breakthrough, then the echelon of the exploitation, and things of this nature. They tried to do it in 2023. During the counteroffensive, where they had the actually best army in Europe, which was Armed Forces of Ukraine. They placed their officers on the tactical and operational level. You had literally American officers which were controlling the battalion-size forces in Armed Forces of Ukraine. And guess what? It was a military catastrophe. Well, by the way, Prigozhin's mutiny was actually timed to that too. All of it went completely, it was a complete catastrophe. They killed 200,000 of the Ukrainian troops, not that they cared much about the personnel of the Ukrainians. They never reached the first line of defense of Russian army. So you have the guys, which now Russian officers, and I'm talking about senior officers, they look at them and say they're not really professionals. They know some tactical stuff, not tactical tricks. They know how to maneuver some force if you are given basically the opportunity. But reality is, they never understood the value. That's why, for example, they were high on their own supply of Ukrainian propaganda about that. Oh yeah, those patriots, they shoot down those Kinzhals and other hypersonic weapons and things like that. They believed it. That tells you everything what those people do not understand. They do not understand the physics of the modern war. None of the U.S. servicemen ever experienced now they kind of had a little bit of insight of the true sustained fire impact by the enemy, which outranges you. They know where you are. They have a great targeting. And so now we have this last, it's not just the months. We're looking soon, months and a half. Yeah. They understand after yesterday's CBS report about, they asked, they finally started talking to people on the ground, U.S. military personnel, and they said, whatever Hexas tells you is lie. Remember this base in Kuwait, which came under the fire, and these were drones. United States doesn't have air defense, which is functional. It is all expensive toys for the sake of the shareholders of the military-industrial companies, and that's it. And we can see this bankruptcy all over the place for people with the military background. It started already in 2022. Now Iran is basically hitting the final nails in the coffin of the American military mythology. And yeah, we can say that, yeah, it's a paper tiger.
Go ahead.
It still has nuclear weapons.
Right,
Obviously.
right. Garland, go ahead.
No, I think, I'll tell you when I knew the U.S. was in deep trouble, and that was 2003, and they were going to go into Iraq. And I saw a woman, I'll never forget, from Pennsylvania, and they were interviewing her, and she said, the United States military could take all other militaries on earth at the same time. And I thought, uh-oh. With that kind of a propagandized population, you're done. You're finished. If the people of the country believe such absurdities, and so then what we would do is we attacked Iraq, which was the worst thing could ever happen to the United States, because Iraq literally had stuff from the 1950s. So the United States ran over a country that had military technology from the 1950s, and then afterwards thought, look at us, we're powerful. We'll go against Afghanistan, which didn't even have that, and lost. And so finally, the U.S. says, okay, we're going to go up against a country that has modern technology, that has long-range fire, that has space-based ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, that can target us from 1,000 kilometers and hit with pinpoint accuracy. And when we did that, it was game, set, and match. We are not set to fight a peer, much less, in this instance, a superior technological force. And unfortunately, we got exactly what was predicted by people who understood the technology of a modern military. And so now you have Jack Keane and other people that still have to pretend as though we have some military superiority. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to build our bases back. So what? So what if we build all of our bases back? In hours, Iran could turn them to rubble again. Those bases in the Middle East are worthless now. We will have any bases that we are allowed to keep in the Middle East will be by the grace of the Iranian government, because they can turn any of them to rubble at a moment's notice because we can't protect them. That's the reality of today's technological military advancements.
Andrei?
Yeah, Garland nailed it. He basically said it extremely well. I mean, again, it's one of the things which is, yeah, they have this terminology which is called force protection, okay? When you look essentially at the air defense, which is the critical component of any kind of the serious conflict, United States doesn't have any. I mean, think about it. United States at the start of this war had 7 THAAD, theater high altitude interceptors, which they of course claimed, which is totally normal. It's chest stomping and oh yeah, this is the best in the world. Which the only thing they can do theoretically were designed to intercept standard classic non-maneuverable ballistic missile of the intermediate range. Well, guess what? We know now, out of 7 of them, 4 of them have been blown up to smithereens, wow. Including the 3. They are 500 million. They are really good radar, actually. The radar for the THAAD is good. Make no mistake. It's. I'm not saying that United States is completely, third rate. No, but they have no even protection, force protection, because obviously the whole idea of the United States in war is to, again, from the World War II, when they essentially were generally dealing with the bombing of their enemies. And now they think that, oh yeah, we have the Air Force, which is a good, air defense. Well, Russians have the proverb, obviously, that the best air defense is our tanks on the airfields of the enemy. But the point is that it's when you look at, for example, even at S-300 PMU, okay, or you look at the even older models of the S-300s. Well, S-300 PMU, it's a completely different story. It's Andrei. But if you take a look at even the previous versions, which preceded the S-400, Patriot PAC-3 doesn't even register compared to them. Compared to S-400, it's like, I don't know, it's not even comparable, okay? And yet they're still gonna come out there and say that, oh yeah, it's so great. And well, it's not. And this is the thing. And this is the only thing United States Army has. It has Patriot PAC-3, bunch of the short-range air defense complexes, which are man-pads essentially, which are Stingers stacked on the top of the either Striker infantry combat vehicle or fighting vehicle, or on Humvee. They may get the Starstreak from British, but again, these are short-range missiles, they're passive, infrared, and that's the only thing they have. You're not going to intercept anything, even obviously, when you look attentively at the Shahed drones from Iran, that were the Shaheeds which and other drones which blew all those radar in those THAADs, and then of course the ballistics came in, and that was it. So United States at this stage now has only 3 THAADs left. PAC-3s have been blown away in special military operation, and I repeat it again, and you can quote me on that, as the deputy commander of the Russia's air space forces, commander of the air defense forces of Russia, Lieutenant General Semyonov stated, Patriot PAC-3 cannot defend itself. Forget about defending anything else. Wow. And I quote him. And so this was primarily, when you look attentively at everything what is happening, in 2016, Robert Latif, Major General from DARPA, 20 years in DARPA, and a PhD in physics himself, by the way, so extremely well-educated man, he wrote in his book that everything American public, including politicians, know about warfare, they know from the entertainment industry. This is a quote. So you literally have people who, including in Pentagon, who go out, they watch the Top Gun Maverick, and they believe this BS. You know, they think that they're brainwashed. And those people who understand, those people who have enough, basically, integrity and professionalism, they are obviously not allowed anywhere in near the decision circles. And you know that it's well-known truth that if you want to get anywhere 2-star general or admiral or 3-star, you need to do only one thing: kiss the butt for political leaders. Period. Right. But when you look attentively at the political system in United States and the way the dynamics and how the politicians operate, it's not about fighting wars. It's about staying elected and saying whatever public wants to hear. That's the recipe for disaster.
Yeah, you know, speaking of, you're right about the movies, you know, Bridge Too Far, when Eagles Dare, and the one I was thinking of the other day, this thing in Esfahan, was a movie made in '66 called The Dirty Dozen. You remember that?
Yeah.
All right. So you remember that incredible feat these guys pulled off, and you know, I'm sure Trump or head I call him Head Case, watched that movie and said, we can do the same thing in Isfahan and pull that stuff off. We'll just get Jim Brown and Lee Marvin and Chuck Coburn, whatever his name is, and we'll get that stuff out of there. I mean, what a harebrained scheme that was, and what actually happened. Does anyone can tell me what had happened that night that they went there to rescue the F-15? What was he called? WSO.
The best I understand is this: that all of it was, basically what was said to the public was that a pilot was shot down, and then we had some great, amazing rescue mission where they went in and they rescued the pilot in amazing circumstances. Okay, as best I can understand from listening to numerous experts, that the initial F-15 or F-18, whichever it was, that was shot down, had a very high-ranking officer in who was apparently leading this special operations mission, and they were going to planning on going into some nuclear facility and either taking the nuclear stuff or planting explosives, blowing it up, whatever the case may be. President Trump has since admitted that there was over 150 planes involved. Now, there is no way in the world that you're going to send in 150 planes to rescue a downed pilot. You just use it. Usually a couple helicopters go in and do that kind of thing. So they attempted to seize an abandoned airfield. So they were going to grab this abandoned airfield in enemy territory, and they were going to operate. They were going to be able to protect that, and they were going to operate from that as a jump off base and make this, daring, Dirty Dozen style move. Well, apparently it was a trap. Apparently one or two of these C-130, these large transport aircrafts, landed. At some point, it was attacked, and another one was attacked. Both of these were eventually blown up. Who blew them up? We're not 100% sure. The Americans say we blew them up. The Iranians say maybe they blew up one and we blew up some others. But before it was done, there was somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 aircraft. I've heard as much as $300 to $400 million. I've heard the number I heard actually, the actual number was $480 million worth of aircraft were destroyed, and that somehow they've got people out. Supposedly there was upwards of 100 people involved. Now, as I could say, clearly that wasn't to rescue one pilot. And they got out and they came up with a cover story, which was, we had a great, operation to rescue a pilot. So that's my understanding of what happened.
Anything you can add to that, Andrei?
No, I mean, I agree with Garland. And for me, it was only one photograph which cleared everything about what a pile of the bovine excrement all those explanations have been. It's the photo of the boom of the AH-6 little bird, which was actually laying far distance from the two burned C-130Js. And when you look at this boom of this destroyed helicopter, you can see this boom is literally, it's like a sieve. It's all the small arms fire. And some holes have been dosed by the probably serious caliber machine gun. That means what? There was this idiotic idea that, somehow those C-130s crashed into each other, on the ground. No, it was clear that those helicopters have been taken out from at least one of the C-130Js, and then they have been destroyed on the ground, and they haven't been destroyed, obviously, by American forces. And we know that there is even video with one of the Basij, these volunteers, military volunteers, which is essentially civilian, running towards the landing site with his children. Carrying his, weapon. He had some kind of rifle. So when you look at this, they didn't have a good time there. And we don't know how many actually personnel they have essentially been killed there, or we know they were wounded. And however they were extracted, we will not know. Iranians are keeping mum on that. And then, of course, this mystery of this, whatever the lady who wasn't, Department of War, or whatever, Pentagon, she was somewhere else, CIA maybe. Looks like Iranian may be holding her. We don't know.
They hold their cards. You know that. They really seem to hold their cards back. They, like Trump, immediately shows his cards, and
Trump is not mentally adequate anymore. The 25th has to be implemented, or he has to be impeached, convicted, and removed from power. Many people already now calling, even the most staunch supporters. And this situation is it's one episode. Many people do not understand that reality on the ground. You can see the video of the American guys, hiding in some, whatever the shelter, and you have these ballistics flying in on the bases, and they literally have nothing to defend against it, so neither does Israel. And in the end, it is all about Israel controlling the United States, which it does control. And Israel, there is a reason why they implemented censorship in Israel. It is being devastated as we speak. They literally have nothing to defend against. As Garland, I believe it was you. No, it was other source which stated that David Sling, the missile, which is used as air defense missile, which they say it's part of the Iron Dome, they are now have the manufacturing date, which is 2026. They literally have Not that it's effective to start with, but I mean, they don't even have any more. They scraping literally the bottom of the barrel. And we have this military catastrophe which unfolded for the United States and its master, which is Israel. And from what I observe in terms of even today's news, there is a whole implosion. I mean, when Melania comes out, okay, and then even Trump himself doesn't know about her statement when they use now Epstein files, obviously, to cover up for the catastrophe there, This is like, it sounds like a joke, but it looks like, something is going on there which we don't know. I really don't want to know it. I want to see the results, those indications, and then make a conclusion. But there is a panic and huge amount of desperation on part of Trump.
Right. Let me ask you, Garland. Are you optimistic about these peace talks that are supposed to take place tomorrow in Islamabad? And why are they sending these two ambulance chasers, Witkoff and Kushner? I mean, they remind me of guys who used to sell siding, Tinman, seriously, or three-card Monte players. Why would anyone talk to them, especially after the last two moves they pulled on Iran?
Well, there were a couple of things. Number one, now, just to update people, as far as I can gather right now, where we are is this. The Iranians are saying at this point, we will only engage in a conversation with you in negotiations if two criteria are met. Number one, there's $7 billion that is of our money that's locked up in a bank, locked away from us in a bank in Qatar, and that money has to be returned. And number two, we have to establish that it's an entire, Lebanon included and everywhere, that this is a region-wide freeze of cessation of hostilities, or however you want to state it. Otherwise, we won't even talk to you. So we're not sure whether they're going to talk or not. I have heard from people who have military knowledge that while Donald Trump says, the usual, they better do what I'm going to telling them or else, that the U.S. is in a very precarious situation simply because the U.S. doesn't, we're running out of stuff. And Donald Trump, most Americans don't know that ever since about the fourth or fifth day, the United States has been constantly contacting Iran, trying to get a ceasefire, and they finally got the ceasefire that they've been asking for from week one. So the United States is in a difficult position where they've been begging for this ceasefire. They finally got it, and now Donald Trump has to, huff and puff and pretend that he's the tough guy in front of Americans, but the Iranians know the reality. So I don't know that how much the Americans can go back and fight. I don't know how much they have. I mean, if you look at it, within say a 10-day period before the ceasefire, the U.S. lost like 20 aircraft. So I don't know if the U.S. really has the wherewithal to A, to continue the fight, but B, there's the political part, because Donald Trump still has to play the tough guy role because he knows he's going to get beaten to death by the system here if he does what he has to do, which is accept Iran's demands to some extent.
Yeah, Andrei, before you add to that, I want you to add to that. Is there an off-ramp, a plausible off-ramp or for Trump, or are they like the off-ramps on the West Side Highway, full of potholes and bumps?
No, he doesn't have off-ramp anymore. It was offered, as usually he blew it up, he screwed up, and that's who he is. Garland correctly stated, but the latest news I have is that actually Qatar and whatever the UAE, whatever the hell the name of this Gulf monarchies, they released $7 billion of Iran already.
They did?
So,
wow.
Yeah, let me check. I'm reading the news, and it was the kind of the breaking news. So, and let me see if it is true. But yeah, it has to be confirmed. But looks like they released it. And what can I say? Iran dictates conditions. Period. And Garland is absolutely correct. If you take a look attentively at the resources the United States has, in terms of the long-range fires, the standoff weaponry, the Tomahawk, clamps, Tomahawk land attack missile, and you have JASSMs, and these are the only real standoff weaponry, not counting, of course, the ground HIMARS and ATACMS, which are deployed in all those Gulfs, and they can still reach the Iranian territory. That's pretty much it. The rest of it is all kinds of those JDAMs, the gliding bombs, and that's it.
Wow.
So obviously, the United States was running out of the Tomahawks and Jassams really fast. And once it's like the Dirty Harry movie, do you feel lucky? Do I feel lucky, punk? Did I count how many shots did I shoot? And obviously, punk being the Gulf monarchies, Israel, and the Iranians are smart people. They calculate. They are Dirty Harry, with this, whatever the Magnum 44, whatever the hell he had, So, and they know their arithmetics. They are good mathematicians, actually, and so they know what operation research is. They know models. And
it's an incredible culture. It really is an incredible
culture.
It's
civilization, okay? It's civilization. As they correctly stated. Sorry?
5,000 years. Right.
Well, they said you want to get us back to Stone Age, and they showed them the map of Iran in Stone Age, which is like 3 times larger than it is today. So, the point is that they understand the dynamics. They calculate those models really well, and they have the good input. Statistical input, obviously, they cannot afford to lie to themselves like Pentagon does, And so what can I say? There's no off-ramp anymore. Wow. If it's correct, which has to be confirmed, don't quote me on that, but I read it, that the $7 billion have been basically released. And then Netanyahu comes out and, we don't want to really bomb Lebanon. We're still going to bomb it, but now in tight coordination with the United States. Sure. And so we'll see what's the deal with the Lebanon. But Iran is in the driving seat. And as Garland correctly stated, essentially we have been the United States begging for ceasefire the same way it begs for ceasefire and continues to beg for ceasefire, just doesn't, pretend anymore to, provide this PR in Ukraine.
Right. Talk about Ukraine. I do want to spend, we have 15 minutes left. I do want to talk about Ukraine a little bit. So why don't we kind of morph into that about the situation in Ukraine? And you're right about us wanting a ceasefire and Zelensky wanting a ceasefire. Why do they want a ceasefire so badly right now?
Well, they want a ceasefire which is long enough. Russia declared the Easter ceasefire for 36 hours, which is normal, the Christian people doing their Christian thing. But, it all will resume, and of course Russians will respond if anything is, violated in these 36 hours, and then after that it resumes. The only reason they want this long ceasefire is to somehow resupply and regroup. You have to understand, there is probably around 100,000 at least of the, probably more, of the armed forces of Ukraine troops, which are locked in number of the localities there, and they cannot rotate them. And that means every day, it came down, for example, I give you one of the well-recorded example. Russians hear, obviously, communications of the armed forces of Ukraine troops with their higher-ups. They had the guys sitting in the basement of one of the broken buildings, and they were communicating with their higher-ups in, Ukraine command, and they have been already written off as missing in action. Still alive guys, This is how the Ukraine fights this war, and so what can I say? They need something to rotate. You cannot obviously maintain troops constantly without rotations. And Ukraine doesn't have capability to rotate them because they're obviously logistics, the supply lines are completely cut off. By the time you have some kind of rotation happening, this rotation force arrives being completely already itself, being reduced to half of it, if not more size. And so, that's the operational situation. And it's 36 hours is not enough. And then, of course, we have to keep in mind, United States has nothing to spare anymore, except for things of like some ammo, some technical stuff. United States doesn't have any more Patriots, which are completely discredited. It doesn't have those missiles. Fact is, United States demanded from Zelensky to return whatever remaining Patriots back to the United States to be used on the in the Middle East. So that tells you everything you need to know. And the only thing which is left is huff and puff, and yeah, especially Europeans, those chihuahuas, pretending that they can have any kind of the effect on that. And that's what Iran does too. It's the strategy of the exhaustion. But of course, very few people in Pentagon read Alexander Svechin and his the debate with Iserson about the nature of the strategy. But I'm asking too much.
Or any of your 4 books, all right? Garland, let me go to you. There's a lot if you want to add on to, but the war in Ukraine. You and I were talking about this earlier, maybe last night. Here we have this situation. People want. You hear them say, "Hands off NATO." Let's continue this war, and all it is Slavs killing Slavs. To me, the racism is at the bottom of all of this, promoting this war. Do you think anybody cares about Ukrainians in the Pentagon or in Europe?
Well, look, let's look at the history. The people, from the perspective of their history, from the perspective of their DNA, the Russians and the Ukrainians have been a common people. But let's look at how the U.S. and the British and the colonial powers in the Middle East. They've got what are they doing? They're setting the Sunni Muslims versus the Shia Muslims. On the Korea Peninsula, they're going to set the North Koreans versus the South Koreans. We're going to have the Ukrainians versus the Russians. Oh, wait a minute. Even in the British Isles, we're going to have the Catholics, Irish, Catholics versus the Protestants. This is the way the empire and imperialism and these colonial powers work. They come into your country, they come into your region, and they pick groups that have so much in common that they're literally oftentimes brotherly peoples, and they set them against each other. And this is just what's happening. We're going to go into Ukraine. We're going to convince. It's a sad state of affairs that they've literally convinced these Ukrainians. And you'll hear the Ukrainians say this: "We're not Slavs. We're Aryans." They've got them really begging, saying we're really like Northern Europeans or something like that. We're the real Aryans, and therefore we're going to have to fight the Russians. They're fighting a country that's 36 times their size. They got 15, 20 million people fighting against Russia. The idea that the Ukrainians ever had a chance for victory is so preposterous that no one in the U.S., no one in the military, no one in the government could have ever possibly believed it. But they didn't care, because the whole plan was, we're going to weaken Russia. And how are we going to weaken it? By throwing these poor Ukrainians up against them, and they're going to get slaughtered. And that's what's happening. And at some point, sadly, if you're a Democrat, you have to believe that the Russians are evil and the Ukrainians have a chance. And one day they'll wake up and they'll say, well, we just didn't give the Ukrainians enough. We didn't give them what they needed to defeat the mighty Russian army. It's a sad state of affairs.
Yeah, it was 3 years ago this day. I was actually in Mariupol and in Donetsk City in the DPR. And when I was there were Heimer missiles. And you mentioned Easter. It was back then. It was Palm Sunday, going into Palm Sunday, Andrei, where they were firing HIMARS missiles into civilian areas, including this open market. And there were women out there that were selling flowers, anticipating that Palm Sunday in Donetsk. And they killed 9 of them. And they were out there the very next day selling flowers. You know what I mean? They were not intimidated. They went right back out there. And what do you say about that? I mean, who are the people that are firing these HIMARS missiles? Is that the average Ukrainian military man, or is it these special battalions, the Right Sector and the Azov Battalion? Who's doing that?
Americans and British. All HIMARS and ATACMS systems are manned by the American volunteers, those people who suddenly retire from the U.S. Army, which is the cover story, and then they go to fight for Ukraine. Actually, Russians are very good at identifying how many of them were killed because they identified the graves on the Arlington National Cemetery. And so, yeah, that's what they are. Do not forget, for many, especially in Pentagon or CIA, I am a subhuman. You have to understand that.
Right,
And
right.
I'm talking about, I'm not exaggerating. Nobody reacted in, for example, U.S. Media when James Clapper said that Russians have by genetics are not really normal people. They want to always, steal and what have you. So that's the American and elites. And plus, don't forget, for the most part, evangelical community, which is the Protestant community, and especially Christian Zionists, they don't consider Russian Orthodox Church and people who adhere to this tradition as real Christians. Obviously, the Christian Zionists are not Christians at all. But whatever, that's the whole other story. But you have many of those people who are actually at the filthy of Israel. They are controlled by Israel, and Israelis, especially American neocons, which are not exclusively Jewish, of course, they still cannot forgive for some reason the Tsarist pogroms. But
Right, it was the
they
Tsar.
forget, of course. Huh?
Yeah, right. It was under the Tsar. It wasn't under.
Yeah, and they don't remember who liberated them from Nazi concentration camps.
Right.
Who were Russians, of course. Yeah, Auschwitz. Well, we know Obama's uncle, of course, liberated Auschwitz. Yeah, but of course it were Red Army. But it doesn't matter. It's. I'm just saying that. That's the attitude, and this is what happened to the United States. Basically, Christian Zionists drove this country into the ground, and the United States now is utterly humiliated politically in foreign policy because it followed in the wake, controlled by Netanyahu, and you have basically the guy who is a puppet of Israel and Mossad, who is the U.S. president and his cabinet. So as the result, there you go. But yeah, they don't care. As I already stated, looking at the pattern of the Anglo-Saxon, which are primarily American and British, but there are also Germans, obviously. Germans who hate Russians on the level of the society. Judging by the way they handled the war, they don't care. Well, they do now because they have been humiliated militarily and paraded as a bunch of the unprofessional hacks. But I mean, for them, it doesn't matter. 200,000 killed in one operation or 300,000 killed. The only primarily U.S. military has been known now, including when you look at actually what has been done in, for example, Kursk Oblast, which saw atrocities and which are pretty much the level of the World War II, where some villages have been executed, women raped, and men tortured, and then everybody lined up across the wall and with children and executed. This is what combined West has become. They will obviously try to avoid talking about it, but that's how they fight the war. And yeah, primarily NATO troops prove themselves not so much operationally or tactically, but as much as the barrier troops. They are really good at shooting into the backs of those poor sods from the Ukrainian guys, from the armed forces of Ukraine, when they begin to run from the front line because they are subjected to the horrendous fire impact. So they get shot by all those NATO guys. Russians also, they basically mock their Polish troops. There are many Polish volunteers. And then, of course, their cartels guys, they didn't do well. Many of them are just basically exterminated in the industrial quantities. So that's what you have. And this is all because that's where your inherent is, I don't know, it's not just racism, it's something larger than that.
Russophobia is a soft word. I mean, there's something more powerful than just Russophobia.
Yeah, it's metaphysical on the level of it's satanic, let's put it this way. So it's not just racism, it's Satanism in pure and simple. And the guys who try to return to actual Christian roots, you know what happened to Charlie Kirk, right?
What happened to Charlie Kirk there, Garland?
Well, I mean, one thing is obvious. Whatever happened to Charlie Kirk, we'll never know because there was such a cover-up. I mean, as you know, my background in investigations and what everyone knows about any investigation, even an officer in police academy at the lowest level has learned about the crime scene. The first thing you have to do is protect the crime scene after there's a crime. And immediately when Charlie Kirk was taken away, they dismantled the crime scene. They paved over the grass. They took the camera. Everything was taken apart. And why didn't the FBI look into that dismantling of the crime scene? Well, I think it's obvious because there was a lot of things going on. There was a miscreant activity afoot, shall we say. So we'll never really know what happened to Charlie Kirk. I don't think, they have a patsy. And so, the old Irish killer, Patsy McPatsy, is in the Hooskow.
Lee Harvey Oswald Jr. Right.
Exactly. But we'll never really know. It's absurd when you look at what happened after Charlie Kirk died from the perspective of an investigator and a person who would handle a crime scene and handle that investigation. I mean, it's almost comical. It's farcical. It's something like you'd see in a Naked Gun movie with Leslie Nielsen to see what happened. And to think that the FBI, I worked with the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, and let me tell you, they're qualified people. They're well-trained people. They're far better trained and more knowledgeable than me. You're not going to tell me that those people looked at that and said, oh, gee, that makes sense to me. So it could only be that there was, bad intentions there.
Something going on there, Andrei. Something is definitely going on. Getting back to Russophobia, I look at the culture of Russia and the music that I played Tchaikovsky, and I'm going to play some Rimsky-Korsakov in a minute, and they got Pushkin, and they got Tolstoy, and they got the greatest novelists of all. The greatest novel ever written to me was the Brothers Karamazov. How could anyone have be Russophobic and think that you're subhuman when you have a culture like Russia has?
Well, I mean, it's first, it's inherent United States complex of inferiority against the civilizations which are much older, and Russia is the only place in the world, actually, where you cannot go and say, oh, we had Holocaust, which obviously it did happen, because Russians say, yeah, what about 27 million of our people, So we cannot go there. That card doesn't work there. There are a lot of things which do not work there. In terms of military history, there is not a single country which can measure up to Russians in this respect. Simple as that. There's not a single continental power. That is why probably United States loves to compare itself to Rome. Actually, the United States is not Rome. And the United States is a unique civilization in its own right. And there is a lot of good about the United States. But obviously, there are some things which have to come into the mythology of the United States as the nation and as civilization. But what do you have? Well, what you have are the boxy, huge mega churches with the prosperity gospel where they worship Israel. Simple as that. That's what the United States has become. And this is not a good, so to speak, way to go into the 21st century. But what can I say? United States produced a wonderful culture, itself in its own right, from music to jazz, to
yes, you're right.
Gershwin, blues, vibrant American literature, absolutely brilliant American literature. So much was happening, and then. You know what happened. Then we had this, so to speak, born-again boomers who are cowardly. Most of them have been draft dodgers, And so how did they born again? They went into those evangelical Protestant dispensationalist churches, including the prosperity gospel, So what can I say? What you would expect from this, it's down pure Satanism. That's what it is. It has nothing to do with the Christianity. It has nothing to do with the Christian tradition. It is downright Israeli worshipping, who is the name on the Tucker Carlson, the guy, the cinematographer, a couple of days ago, he said, it's a Talmudic Jews wrapped into their Christianity. That's what is happening there, and this is very little culture there. I mean, there's very little, in fact, of their, and even their connection to the ideas of the even Enlightenment, let alone Renaissance. And United States hasn't been there, when it was happening. So now what they have, they want to play with the shadows of all that, and as such, as Michael Brenner beautifully posted a couple days ago in his, well, one of the few truly specialists in international relations. He wrote that the moral debasement of the United States is complete. And we're not talking about the even combined West. Combined West is dead. I mean, but United States debased itself so much that I don't know how it's going to recover from that. Albeit we have some healthy trends, but who knows how long it will take.
That was well said. We're going to give you the last word there, Mr. Nixon. My fellow Americans, let me make this perfectly clear. This is not Richard Nixon, it is Garland Nixon. All right, Garland, you get the last word here. And by the way, Smoothie X12 on YouTube, and get his books, Andrei Martyanov. But go ahead, Garland, you get the last minute before we go out with this beautiful music by Rimsky-Korsakov, Scheherazade. All right?
Well, I'll put it to you like this. One of the problems we have here is we have these brainwashed masses. You know, you let the people who let the ruling elite give them their enemies. You know, it's like, okay, if you're a Republican, then you should hate, I don't know, you hate anybody who Israel hates, and maybe China or whoever. If you're a Democrat, you have to hate Russia. You know, they give you a list of enemies, of people to blame for your problems who are 8,000 miles away. And I say this, my enemies are not in Russia, they're not in China, they're not in Iran, they're like in Wall Street and Silicon Valley and Lockheed Martin. People have to understand that the ruling elite are the ones who made the decisions to drive and deteriorate your ability to feed your family into the ground, and they want to mislead you by pointing you to Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping or somebody who doesn't make the decisions, who didn't invent neoliberalism, who doesn't give every dime you make to the ruling elite.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. I got to tell you guys, this has been like the quickest hour. Seriously, it really has been. We didn't even get to the economy, which is really tanking in this country. I took the subway. It went up to 3.5 won. All right, so I'm using won now to get on the subway. All right, and I hope we get out of this mess real soon. I don't want to see anybody else die. I hope we have a perfect landing. Be watching you later on today, I hope. Mr. Martyanov, are you doing a video tonight?
Tomorrow.
Oh, tomorrow. Okay, make sure you watch it. And listen, at 6 o'clock, you can catch Garland on his News View show on WPFW. And also, every day, you can get at least one video by him on YouTube. Thank you guys both. All right?